Howdy guys, in today's video, I'm going to show you how to adapt vintage lenses onto your Sony cameras. So let's just get right into it. So what exactly is a vintage lens? I would say it's any lens that was made not for digital cameras, but for film cameras, before I'd say the 2000s. One of the most notable features of vintage lenses is that you're not going to find electronic contacts on the bottom of them. The electronic contacts on modern lenses pretty much tell the camera that the aperture is at, and some other things like metadata, focal length, that sort of thing, and you won't find that on a vintage lens. Actually, instead of that, you actually have a physical aperture ring here that you can spin to change the aperture. But why exactly should you use a vintage lens? Why should you use a lens that doesn't have autofocus? Couple of different reasons. Vintage lenses typically have very interesting character. Not every single one of them, but most of them have some sort of unique feature or character point that makes them unique. Like this Canon FD lens, for example, it just renders very, very deep, nice contrast. I don't know how to explain it, but it just looks amazing. And then there's other lenses that provide insane bokeh and other fun, exciting things like crazy chromatic aberration and stuff like that. Besides that, vintage lenses are they can oftentimes just be cheap. Like if you're on an extreme budget, it's oftentimes better to buy a vintage lens than it is to buy a brand new modern autofocus lens. This lens, for example, I think you can get this on eBay for $70 or $80, and then the adapter itself, right here, is I think like $13 on Amazon. And then finally, to be honest, it's just super interesting using a vintage lens. Who knows who owned this before me? How many photographers have touched this lens before I bought it? What kind of images has it created? There's just so much history in it. Okay, so how do you actually use a vintage lens? So first step, before we do anything, you're going to want to turn on your camera, go into the menu settings here, go up to the second tab, like this little gear icon, so to speak, and then go to page 3, and you're going to turn on the release without lens option. What that does is it allows your camera doesn't know that there's a lens attached to it when it's vintage, because again, there's no electronic contacts. So what that setting pretty much does is it tells the camera okay, you can take a picture even if there's quote unquote no lens attached. After that, you're going to need to obviously buy a lens. This is a Canon FD 50mm f1.8. I've had this thing for about 3.5 years and it's awesome. Second, you need the appropriate adapter. Typically, you can just find the lens mount. This is a Canon FD lens. And then on Amazon or B&H, whatever, you can just type in FD to E-mount, or whichever lens you need. And the adapters are typically pretty cheap. And then the only thing you need to do, attach it. A lot of vintage lenses attach a little bit differently, but this Canon lens, you actually push it on and then you slide this locking mechanism on each side. And then, just like you'd mount a standard lens to your camera, that's it. You're pretty much ready to go. So yeah, that's pretty much it when it comes to vintage lenses. I mean, the only thing you need to do with this now is, manually focus it and change the aperture on the camera itself. If you'd like to learn more about manual focus, I would highly suggest you check out my video linked up here. I go into a lot more detail on how to use manual focus, specifically on the Sony a6000, but it does apply to any Sony camera, so definitely go check that video out. And if you guys are looking for suggestions on lenses to buy, obviously I like the Canon FD lineup quite a bit. It's been so amazing for me. Some of my other favorites I've used are the Konica AR series, and then finally the Helios 34M2 is another iconic vintage lens. You've probably seen its iconic bokeh somewhere on the internet. But yeah, that pretty much sums it up, guys. If you like this video, please like it. And, if you want more from me, consider subscribing. Thank you so much, and enjoy the vintage lenses.